I drove through the rare biting Atlanta snow on Christmas Eve just to bring my family a homemade sweet potato pie, only to find my parents' sprawling, gated estate, pitch black and freezing. My 80-year-old grandfather was shivering in a dark corner, completely abandoned. A careless, sticky note left on the kitchen island informed me that my parents and golden child brother had flown to the Swiss Alps for a luxury vacation, leaving me as the unpaid nurse. When I confronted them, they laughed in my face and told me to be useful for once. They had no idea that a few minutes later my grandfather would drop his confused act, pour himself a glass of bourbon, and ask me if I was ready to destroy them. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth. The cold was the first thing that hit me when I unlocked the massive mahogany front doors of the Sterling family estate in Buckhead. It was not just the chill of the Georgia snowstorm blowing in from the outside. It was a deep, neglected cold radiating from the walls of the house itself. I was balancing two heavy suitcases and carefully holding the sweet potato pie I had stayed up until 2 in the morning baking. I had driven across the city expecting the usual overwhelming holiday production my mother Vivian always orchestrated. Every year she hired decorators to string thousands of lights across the facade, filling the interior with the scent of roasted greens, honey-baked ham, and cinnamon. It was always a performance for the neighbors, a way to prove that the Sterling family was the picture of Black excellence and generational wealth. But stepping into the foyer, I was met with absolute suffocating darkness. I called out, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. No one answered. The silence was heavy, almost oppressive. I set my bags down on the Italian marble floor, the thud sounding unnaturally loud. My breath plumed in the freezing air of the entryway. I fumbled for the light switch, but when I flicked it, only a dim emergency bulb flickered on in the hallway. That was when I saw him. Grandpa Silas was sitting in his favorite leather rocking chair near the massive unlit stone fireplace. He was wearing his day clothes, but someone had carelessly thrown a paper-thin throw blanket over his lap. The house had to be 50 degrees inside. He was just sitting there, staring blankly ahead into the dark hearth. Panic surged through my chest. I dropped the pie box on the nearest table and rushed over to him, falling to my knees beside his chair. I grabbed his hands. They were like ice. For the past year, my parents had been telling everyone that Grandpa Silas was slipping away. They claimed his mind was going, that dementia was stealing the brilliant, ruthless businessman who had built the Sterling logistics firm from the ground up 50 years ago. I had been visiting as often as my travel schedule allowed, but my mother always managed to strictly control my time with him, hovering over us and answering questions on his behalf. Now, finding him left alone in a freezing house on Christmas Eve, a wave of profound nausea hit me. I stood up and ran to the kitchen to find the thermostat, only to discover the entire heating system had been manually turned off at the main control panel. My heart hammered against my ribs as I rushed to the kitchen island to turn on the secondary lights. That was when I saw the pale yellow square of paper resting perfectly centered on the pristine quartz countertop. I recognized my mother Vivian's immaculate sweeping cursive immediately. I picked up the note, my eyes scanning the words, and with every sentence the blood in my veins turned to liquid fire. It read exactly this: Elias, Jamal, Chloe, and I caught a red-eye to the Swiss Alps. Chloe's parents paid for the chalet, and we simply could not say no to the networking opportunity. Since your little art appraisal hobby does not have real hours, you are on grandpa duty. Make sure you bathe him. Be useful for once. I read the words 3 times, my vision blurring with pure, unadulterated rage. My little art appraisal hobby. That was how my mother described the elite, self-funded private art authentication business I had spent my entire adult life building. I traveled across the globe verifying high-value pieces for private collectors and museums. I was successful, independent, and respected in my field. But because I did not sit in a sterile corporate boardroom under my father's thumb, like my brother Jamal did, my career was nothing more than a cute distraction to them. They told the congregation at our church that I was a starving freelancer because they were ashamed I had not followed their rigid path. But the insult to my career was nothing compared to the blatant criminal neglect of leaving an 80-year-old man alone in a freezing house. They had turned off the heat to save money while they flew across the world to play dress-up with my brother's wealthy white in-laws. The utter disregard for the man who had funded their entire opulent lifestyle made me sick to my stomach. I did not waste time crying. The years of being the family scapegoat had burned the tears out of me a long time ago. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, marched right back into the living room, and hit FaceTime on my brother Jamal's contact name. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity before the screen connected. The contrast between my reality and his was jarring. I was standing in a dark, freezing living room in Atlanta. Jamal was illuminated by the warm, flattering glow of a first-class airport lounge. I could hear the soft clinking of crystal glasses and soothing background music. Jamal was wearing a designer cashmere sweater holding a flute of champagne. He looked annoyed that I had called. "What is it, Kendra?" he asked, not bothering with a greeting. "We are waiting for our connecting flight in Paris, and I really do not have time for your drama right now." My drama. I kept my voice dangerously low, struggling to control the fury vibrating through my chest. "Jamal, you left Grandpa alone in a freezing house. The heat is completely shut off. He was just sitting in the dark with a thin blanket. Are you completely out of your minds? Do you know how dangerous this is?" Jamal rolled his eyes, taking a casual sip of his champagne. "Do not act like a martyr, Kendra. You are 33, single and dusting off old paintings for pennies. You have nothing but free time. I run the Sterling family logistics firm now. I carry the weight of this family's legacy on my shoulders. I need this trip to secure a massive investment from Chloe's father. Just feed the old man and try not to burn the house down." Before I could tear into his delusion of running the company, a pale, manicured hand reached into the frame. Chloe, Jamal's entitled wife, leaned into view. She was wearing oversized designer sunglasses indoors and a faux sympathetic pout that I had grown to despise over the last 3 years. Chloe came from old generational wealth, and my parents treated her like royalty, bending over backwards to accommodate her every whim, simply because her presence elevated their social status among their elite peers. "Thanks for taking one for the team, Ken," Chloe said, her voice dripping with that sickly sweet condescension she always used when speaking to me. "We would have put him in a care home for the week, but your dad said you really needed a free place to stay anyway to save some money. So it is a win-win for everyone." The sheer audacity of her microaggression left me momentarily speechless. She spoke to me as if I were the hired help, a narrative my brother not only allowed, but actively encouraged. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "I do not need a free place to stay, Chloe," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "And Jamal, you do not run anything. You play CEO with Grandpa's money. You left a vulnerable elder alone. This is elder abuse. I should call the police right now and have them meet you at the gate when you land." Jamal's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second before hardening into anger. "Are you threatening me?" he snapped. Before I could answer, a loud, booming voice interrupted from the background of the video call. It was my father, Elias. He stepped into the frame, his face flushed with irritation. "Hang up the phone, Jamal," my father barked, glaring at the camera as if I were a misbehaving child. "Kendra, your whining is embarrassing us in front of the lounge staff. Stop being so dramatic and do what your mother told you to do for once in your life." The screen went black. They hung up on me. I stood in the center of the sprawling, shadowed living room, staring at my own reflection in the dark screen of my phone. My chest heaved with shallow, angry breaths. The complete lack of empathy, the absolute arrogance, it was suffocating. I had spent my entire life trying to prove my worth to people who were fundamentally incapable of seeing me as anything other than a convenience or a punching bag. I slowly lowered the phone, the silence of the cold house pressing in on me from all sides. I turned back toward the fireplace, intending to find a heavy blanket for my grandfather before figuring out how to manually override the heating system. But as I took a step forward, the heavy oak floorboard near the hearth creaked. I froze. Grandpa Silas was no longer slumped in the rocking chair. I watched in absolute disbelief as the frail, stooping 80-year-old man I had worried about for months suddenly straightened his spine. The tremor in his hands completely vanished. He reached up and casually adjusted the collar of his cardigan. His movements were fluid, precise, and entirely devoid of the frailty he had been projecting moments earlier. He did not look confused. He did not look lost. He walked over to the antique wooden bar cart positioned against the far wall. The click of glass against glass echoed sharply in the silent room as he lifted the heavy crystal decanter. He poured himself a neat measure of top-shelf bourbon, his hand perfectly steady. I stood rooted to the spot, my mind struggling to process what I was witnessing. "Grandpa," I whispered, my voice sounding incredibly small in the cavernous room. Silas turned to face me. The blank, vacant stare that had clouded his eyes for the past 6 months was gone. In its place was the razor-sharp, calculating intensity of the man who had ruthlessly built a multi-million-dollar logistics empire during a time when men who looked like him were denied bank loans. His gaze pierced right through me, sharp and dangerous. "You can close your mouth, baby girl," he said, his voice deep, resonant, and terrifyingly clear. "There is nothing wrong with my mind." I took a hesitant step forward. "You have been faking it," I asked, the reality of the situation slowly dawning on me. "But why? Why would you pretend to lose your memory?" Silas took a slow, deliberate sip of his bourbon. He let the amber liquid sit on his tongue for a moment before swallowing. He walked back toward the center of the room, his presence commanding the space just as it had when I was a child. "Because, Kendra, a man never truly knows what is in the hearts of his heirs until they believe he no longer has the power to stop them," he said, his tone devoid of any familial warmth. It was the voice of a general assessing a battlefield. "I needed to see exactly how your father and your brother would handle the keys to the kingdom once they thought the king was dead in his own mind." He paused, looking around the freezing dark room that was supposed to be a home. "And now I have my answer. They turned off the heat in winter and left me to freeze just to go play house with a family that smiles in their faces and laughs behind their backs." He set his crystal glass down on the edge of the marble kitchen island. The sound cut through the tension like a gunshot. He looked directly into my eyes, and I saw a lifetime of hard-won wisdom and newly forged wrath burning behind them. "Shall we begin?" he asked. I did not need him to clarify what he meant. The exhaustion from my drive, the chill in the air, the sting of my family's casual cruelty, all of it evaporated in an instant. I looked at the man who had always been the silent observer of my parents' favoritism, the man who was now offering me the one thing I had never been given in this family: a chance to fight back. I took a deep breath, dropping my phone onto the counter next to my mother's pathetic sticky note. I stepped up to the island, meeting his gaze with the exact same unyielding intensity. "Yes," I said, "we begin." The screen of my phone went completely black. I stood in the middle of that cavernous, freezing kitchen, staring at my own reflection in the dark glass. My chest heaved with short, angry breaths. The sheer audacity of my father cutting the feed because my valid concern for his own father was an embarrassment in a luxury airport lounge felt like a physical blow. The absolute arrogance of my brother playing corporate titan on my grandfather's dime while his wife insulted my career was suffocating. I gripped the edge of the marble island, trying to steady my shaking hands. I had spent my entire adult life building my own name, refusing to take a single dime from the Sterling family accounts precisely because I knew every dollar came with chains and insults. Yet here I was, standing in a house that felt like a refrigerator treated like the hired help. I took a deep breath, forcing the heat of my anger down. Getting mad would not warm up an 80-year-old man. I turned away from the kitchen island, intending to march down the hall to the linen closet and grab the heaviest down comforter I could find before figuring out how to manually override whatever lock my father had placed on the thermostat. But before I could take a second step, a sharp, deliberate sound stopped me dead in my tracks. A heavy oak floorboard creaked near the hearth. I froze. My eyes darted toward the darkened living room. Grandpa Silas was no longer slumped in the leather rocking chair. I watched in absolute disbelief as the frail, stooping man I had spent the last 6 months worrying sick about suddenly straightened his spine. He stood up to his full height. The pronounced tremor in his hands, the one that had forced my mother to cut his meat at Thanksgiving, completely vanished. He reached down and grabbed the pathetic paper-thin blanket they had left him with. He did not just drop it. He threw it onto the floor with a gesture of pure, unadulterated disgust. He did not shuffle his feet the way he had been doing since the summer. He strode. His steps were fluid, precise, and entirely devoid of the frailty he had been projecting for half a year. I could not move a single muscle. My brain scrambled to find a logical explanation. Was this a symptom of the freezing cold triggering an adrenaline rush? Was it a brief, lucid moment before the cognitive decline swallowed him back up? I watched silently as he walked directly toward the antique wooden bar cart positioned against the far wall of the living room. The sharp click of crystal against crystal echoed through the silent house. He lifted the heavy decanter of top-shelf bourbon. I watched his grip. It was solid. He poured himself a neat, generous measure, and not a single drop spilled onto the polished silver tray beneath it. He set the decanter down, turned around, and faced me. The cloudy, vacant glaze that had dimmed his eyes for months, the look that made my heart ache every time I visited, was entirely gone. In its place was a razor-sharp, calculating intensity. It was the fierce, penetrating gaze of a man who had ruthlessly built a multi-million-dollar logistics empire in the Deep South, during a time when men who looked like him were routinely denied basic bank loans. He took a slow, deliberate sip of the amber liquid, letting it sit on his tongue for a moment before swallowing. Then he spoke. "You can close your mouth, baby girl." He said it with a deep, resonant baritone that commanded the entire room. "There is absolutely nothing wrong with my mind." I took a hesitant step forward, my boots making a soft thud against the hardwood. I felt like the floor was tilting beneath me. "You have been faking it," I asked, my voice sounding incredibly small in the massive freezing space. "But why? Why would you pretend to lose your memory and let them treat you like a burden?" Silas swirled the bourbon in his glass, his expression hardening into something made of stone. "Because Kendra, a man, never truly knows what is in the dark hearts of his heirs until they believe he no longer has the power to stop them." He stepped into the faint light spilling from the kitchen. It was the voice of a general assessing a battlefield. "I needed to see exactly how your father and your brother would handle the keys to the kingdom once they thought the king was dead in his own mind. I built an empire from the dirt up. I sacrificed sleep, peace, and blood to make sure the sterling name meant power. But lately I started noticing discrepancies in the company ledgers. I noticed how Jamal strutted around boardrooms taking credit for contracts I secured a decade ago. And I noticed how your father stood by and let him do it." He took another step closer, his gaze sweeping around the dark, freezing house. "So I decided to test them. I let my hands shake. I let my words trail off. I let them take away my car keys and checkbooks. And now I have my answer." They turned off the heat in the middle of winter to save a few dollars on the utility bill and left me to freeze in my own home. They abandoned me so they could fly first class across the ocean to play house with a family that smiles in their faces and laughs behind their backs. Silas looked directly into my eyes. "Do you know how many Sunday dinners I sat through this past year staring at the wall, pretending I did not understand a word while your father and brother mocked your life choices? I sat right there drooling into a napkin while Elias told our relatives you were a financial failure. I listened to Chloe make snide remarks about your clothes. They thought I was a vegetable, so they spoke freely. They did not know I was keeping a mental ledger of every insult they threw at you. I know you did not drop out of law school because you could not handle the pressure. I know Elias cut your tuition funding the day before the semester started so he could buy Jamal that ridiculous sports car to impress Chloe's father. And I know you built your art authentication business completely self-funded. You are the only one in this bloodline with my actual backbone." The softness vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a newly forged wrath that seemed to heat the very air around him. He walked over to the marble kitchen island and set his crystal glass down on the edge. The sound cut through the tension like a gunshot. He stared at me, the exhaustion of the cold entirely replaced by a lethal focus. "Shall we begin?" The line went dead. I stared at my own reflection in the blackened screen of my phone, my pulse hammering against my ribs in the freezing kitchen. The sheer disrespect of it all left a bitter metallic taste in my mouth. My father Elias had hung up on me, to save face, in front of strangers, in a first-class airport lounge, leaving me standing in a house that felt like a meat locker, with an 80-year-old man they had discarded like garbage. I shoved the phone deep into my coat pocket. The residual heat of my anger was the only thing keeping me warm. I took a long, shaky breath, actively pushing the fury down into the pit of my stomach. Boiling over would not raise the temperature in the room, and it certainly would not keep my grandfather from freezing to death. I turned away from the cold marble of the kitchen island, plotting my path down the long, shadowed hallway to the guest suites. I needed to strip the beds of every heavy duvet I could find before figuring out how to manually bypass whatever lock my father had placed on the digital thermostat. But before I could take a single step forward, a sharp, heavy creak echoed through the silent living room. I froze in place. The sound had come from the hardwood floor right in front of the dead soot-stained fireplace. I whipped my head around, squinting through the shadows. Grandpa Silas was no longer slumped in his leather rocking chair. I watched in absolute paralyzing disbelief as the frail, stooping man I had spent the last 6 months agonizing over suddenly straightened his spine. He stood up to his full imposing height, his shoulders squared. The pronounced heartbreaking tremor in his hands, the very same tremor that had forced my mother to cut his turkey at Thanksgiving, completely vanished. He reached down with a steady, forceful grip, grabbed the pathetic paper-thin throw blanket they had draped over his legs, and threw it onto the floor with a gesture of pure, unadulterated disgust. He did not shuffle his feet the way he had been doing since the summer. He strode. His steps were fluid, precise, and entirely devoid of the physical frailty he had been projecting for half a year. I could not move a single muscle. My brain scrambled frantically to find a logical medical explanation. Was this a symptom of the freezing cold triggering a massive adrenaline rush? Was it a brief lucid moment before the severe cognitive decline swallowed his mind back up? I watched silently, barely daring to breathe as he walked directly toward the antique wooden bar cart positioned against the far wall of the living room. The sharp click of crystal against crystal rang out through the silent house. He lifted the heavy decanter of top-shelf bourbon. I stared at his grip. It was solid as a rock. He poured himself a neat, generous measure, and not a single drop spilled onto the polished silver tray beneath it. He set the heavy decanter down, turned around, and faced me. The cloudy, vacant glaze that had dimmed his eyes for months, the hollow look that made my heart ache every single time I visited, was entirely gone. In its place was a razor-sharp, calculating intensity. It was the fierce, penetrating gaze of a man who had ruthlessly built a multi-million-dollar logistics empire in Atlanta during a time when men who looked like him were routinely denied basic commercial bank loans. He took a slow, deliberate sip of the amber liquid, letting it sit on his tongue for a long moment before swallowing. Then he spoke. "You can close your mouth, baby girl." He said it with a deep, resonant baritone that instantly commanded the entire room. There is absolutely nothing wrong with my mind. I took a hesitant step forward, my boots making a soft thud against the hardwood floor. I felt like the entire house was tilting beneath my feet. "You have been faking it," I asked, my voice sounding incredibly small in the massive freezing space. "But why? Why would you pretend to lose your memory and let them treat you like a burden?" Silas swirled the bourbon in his glass, his expression hardening into something made of solid stone. "Because Kendra, a man, never truly knows what is in the dark hearts of his heirs, until they believe he no longer has the power to stop them." He stepped into the faint, pale light spilling from the kitchen windows. It was the voice of a general assessing a compromised battlefield. "I needed to see exactly how your father and your brother would handle the keys to the kingdom once they thought the king was dead in his own mind. I built our empire from the dirt up. I sacrificed sleep, peace, and blood to make sure the sterling name meant undeniable power. But lately I started noticing discrepancies in the company ledgers. I noticed how Jamal strutted around boardrooms taking credit for contracts I secured a decade ago. And I noticed how your father stood by and let him do it." He took another step closer, his sharp gaze sweeping around the dark, freezing house. So I decided to test them. I let my hands shake. I let my words trail off into nothing. I let them take away my car keys and my checkbooks without a fight. And now I have my definitive answer. They turned off the heat in the middle of winter to save a few dollars on the utility bill and left me to freeze in my own home. They abandoned me so they could fly first class across the ocean to play house with a family that smiles in their faces and laughs behind their backs. Silas walked right up to the kitchen island and looked directly into my eyes. Do you know how many Sunday dinners I sat through this past year staring blankly at the wall, pretending I did not understand a single word, while your father and brother mocked your life choices? I sat right there drooling into a linen napkin, while Elias told our relatives you were a financial failure. I listened to Chloe make snide remarks about your clothes and your independence. They thought I was a vegetable, so they spoke freely. They did not know I was keeping a meticulous mental ledger of every insult they threw at you. I know you did not drop out of law school because you could not handle the pressure. I know Elias cut your tuition funding the day before the semester started, just so he could buy Jamal that ridiculous sports car to impress Chloe's father. And I know you built your elite art authentication business completely self-funded. You are the only one in this bloodline with my actual backbone. The underlying softness in his tone vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a newly forged wrath that seemed to heat the very air around him. He set his crystal glass down on the edge of the marble island. The sharp clack of the glass cut through the tension like a gunshot. He stared at me, the physical exhaustion of the cold entirely replaced by a lethal, unwavering focus. Shall we begin? I nodded and walked over to the massive marble island, pulling out one of the heavy velvet bar stools. I sat down across from the man I had spent the last half-year mourning in advance. The freezing temperature inside the house suddenly felt entirely irrelevant. The sheer magnitude of what was happening commanded all of my attention. Silas poured himself another small splash of bourbon, his steady hands moving with practiced grace. He leaned against the counter and began to dismantle the elaborate lie my family had been living. He told me it started 7 months ago. The Sterling logistics firm was not just a business to him, it was his lifeblood. He built it from a single delivery truck in the 1970s, navigating a system designed to keep black men from securing commercial bank loans. He grew it into a southeastern empire through grit and flawless execution. When he handed the day-to-day operations over to my father Elias, he trusted him to maintain the legacy. But Silas never stopped reviewing the quarterly reports. 6 months ago, Silas caught a glaring discrepancy. A massive wire transfer hidden under the guise of a shell vendor account. When he confronted Elias about the missing funds, my father had scoffed. Elias had looked at the man who built their entire fortune and dismissed him, waving a hand and claiming the old man simply did not understand modern corporate accounting. Elias suggested Silas was getting confused in his old age. So Silas decided to give them exactly what they asked for. If they wanted an old, confused man, he would play the part flawlessly. He wanted to see how deep the rot went. He told me that when people believe your mind is gone, they stop filtering their conversations. You become invisible, a piece of furniture in the room. They stop hiding their greed. Silas leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto mine. And they do not just talk about the company, Kendra. They talk about you. I stiffened, bracing myself. Every Sunday after service at Mount Zion, your mother stands in the fellowship hall, wearing her designer hats, and shakes her head about her poor, struggling daughter. Silas said, his voice laced with disgust. Vivian tells the congregation to pray for you. She says you are a starving freelancer, living gig to gig, refusing to get a real job. But your father is worse. Do you know what Elias tells the board members and the deacons? He tells them you dropped out of law school because you had a nervous breakdown. He says you simply could not handle the academic pressure and folded. A harsh, bitter laugh tore out of my throat, echoing sharply off the cold kitchen walls. A nervous breakdown. Is that what he calls it? I looked at Silas, the old sting of betrayal rising hot in my chest. I did not drop out of law school, Grandpa. I was in the top 10% of my class. I was on the dean's list. I knew it, Silas murmured, but I need to hear it from you. Tell me what Elias did. The week before my second-year tuition was due, I received a notice from the bursar's office that my payment had bounced. I explained the memory tasting like ash in my mouth. I called Dad in a panic because he controlled the college trust fund he had set up for me and Jamal. He did not lose the money, Grandpa. He drained my entire account without telling me. He took every single cent of my tuition to buy Jamal a brand new Porsche 911. Silas gripped his glass tightly, his jaw clenching. Elias told me Jamal needed the luxury sports car as a graduation gift to project the right image at his new corporate law firm. I continued, my voice shaking with a rage I had suppressed for years. Jamal barely passed the bar exam on his third try. But he got the luxury car to impress Chloe's wealthy white family, and I got an eviction notice from my campus apartment. When I begged Dad for help, he told me a law degree was a luxury for a woman, and I should just focus on finding a husband to support me. Silas closed his eyes for a brief second, shaking his head at the absolute disgrace of his son's actions. I did not beg them for another dime after that day. I said, my voice hardening into steel. I pivoted. I took my undergraduate degree in art history, and I hustled. I worked 3 separate jobs to keep a roof over my head. I spent my nights studying brushstrokes, canvas aging techniques, and provenance documentation. I built an elite art authentication and private appraisal firm entirely from scratch. I now cater to high-net-worth private collectors and museums across the globe. I am completely self-funded and my business is thriving. I just bought my own private gallery space downtown in cash. My parents hide my success because it does not involve bowing down to Elias or feeding Jamal's massive ego. Silas opened his eyes and a slow, grim smile spread across his face. It was the proudest look anyone in my family had ever given me. I see you, baby girl, Silas said, his voice thick with genuine respect. I have always seen you. You are the only one in this bloodline who inherited my spine. Jamal needs a 6-figure car to feel like a man. Elias needs validation from Chloe's old money parents to feel like he matters. But you built your own table while they were busy trying to kick you out of theirs. He finished the last drop of his bourbon and set the glass down with finality. He turned and walked away from the kitchen island, heading straight back into the darkened living room. I watched as he approached the massive floor-to-ceiling stone fireplace. He reached his hand up, feeling along the rough masonry of the mantel. He pressed against a seemingly solid stone on the side of the chimney structure. With a soft grinding noise, the stone shifted. Silas gripped the edge and slid a loose brick completely out of the wall, revealing a dark, hidden cavity inside the stonework. He reached his hand into the secret compartment and pulled out a small, sleek, silver flash drive. He walked back into the kitchen, the heavy brick left resting on the hearth. He moved to the marble island and slid the silver flash drive across the smooth surface. It glided silently, stopping right in front of my folded hands. They think they own everything, Silas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous conspiratorial whisper that sent a thrill of anticipation straight down my spine. They think they have outsmarted the old man and broken the defiant daughter. They are fools. He tapped his index finger on the marble right next to the drive. Plug it in. I pulled my laptop from my leather work tote and set it flat on the freezing marble island. The cold radiating from the stone seeped into my forearms, but I barely registered it. I took the small silver flash drive from Grandpa Silas and pushed it into the port. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh blue glow over my grandfather's face. He did not look like an 80-year-old man waiting to die. He looked like an apex predator watching a trap spring shut. A window popped open on my desktop, revealing a meticulously organized directory. There were dozens of folders containing banking statements, corporate tax filings, internal memos, and expense reports for Sterling Freight and Logistics. I have spent the last 10 years running an elite art authentication firm. My entire livelihood depends on forensic attention to detail. I track stolen antiquities, unearth hidden offshore accounts, and spot forged provenance documents for private collectors who pay me handsomely for my discretion. Auditing a mismanaged logistics company was child's play. I clicked on the master ledger file for the current fiscal year, and the sheer magnitude of the financial bloodbath immediately hit me. The numbers were glaring in brilliant red. The company operating capital was completely gone. I scrolled down the columns, my eyes widening as I traced the flow of money. Sterling Freight had been the pride of our community for decades. Silas had built a fleet of trucks that ran shipping routes across the entire Southeast. But the accounts paying for fuel maintenance and driver salaries were completely overdrawn. Instead, the money had been systematically siphoned out through a web of shell vendor accounts. I opened up the transaction history for the largest shell account and my stomach turned. These were not business expenses. I saw a wire transfer for $40,000 to the ultra-exclusive Buckhead Country Club. There was an $80,000 withdrawal routed directly to a luxury car dealership the exact same week Jamal conveniently showed up to Sunday dinner revving the engine of a brand new imported sports car. I kept scrolling and the picture became sickeningly clear. My father Elias and my brother Jamal had been bleeding the company dry to fund a completely fraudulent lifestyle. But the largest and most frequent wire transfers were not going to car dealerships or country clubs. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were being directly funneled into a private wealth management firm. I recognized the name immediately. It was the real estate development group owned by Chloe's father. I looked up at Silas, the blue light of the screen reflecting in his dark eyes. "They are bankrolling Chloe's family," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and absolute rage. "Jamal is using your company funds to buy into her father's real estate projects." Silas leaned heavily against the marble counter, his jaw set like stone. "Your brother thinks he can buy respect from old money white folks using the sweat off my back," Silas said, his voice thick with contempt. "Jamal brings that entitled little girl into my house and lets her treat you like the hired help, all because he believes her pedigree validates him. He thinks buying her father a golf course development makes him an equal. He is a fool. Elias is a fool for letting him do it. They have gutted my legacy to play dress-up for people who would not even let me drink from their water fountains when I started this company." I looked back at the screen, pulling up the corporate credit card statements. The level of theft was staggering. Just last month, while Elias was standing in the church lobby, loudly lamenting my supposed financial struggles to the entire congregation, he had used company funds to fly Chloe and Jamal to a private wine tasting in Napa Valley. While they were turning off the heat in this very house to save on the electric bill, they were charging 5-star hotel suites and designer ski gear to a commercial logistics account. The hypocrisy was so heavy, it felt suffocating. They were actively destroying a half-century of Black generational wealth just to maintain the illusion of unlimited power. "But they made a mistake," I said, scrolling frantically through the corporate governance folders. "They are pulling operating capital, which means the vendors are going to stop providing services. The drivers will stop getting paid. The whole company is going to collapse before the end of the fiscal quarter." How did they think they could hide this from the board of directors? "There is no board of directors," Silas said quietly. He walked around the island and stood behind my shoulder, pointing a steady finger at a folder labeled Legal Incorporation. "Open that one, baby girl." I clicked the folder and opened the foundational trust documents for Sterling Enterprise. I scanned the legal jargon, my eyes locking onto the signatory page. My breath caught in my throat. I read the paragraph again to make sure I was not hallucinating. I turned around and stared at my grandfather. "You never signed it over," I whispered. Silas let out a low, dark chuckle that held absolutely no humor. "Your father struts around Atlanta calling himself the chief executive officer. Jamal prints out glossy business cards naming himself the heir apparent. They walk into banks and sign contracts because they hold operational management titles. But they were so arrogant, so blinded by their own greed and their absolute certainty that I was rotting away in a rocking chair that they never actually checked the foundational trust documents." Silas tapped the screen right on his own signature. "I gave them operational control 10 years ago. But the holding company, the entity that actually owns every single truck, every warehouse, and every dollar in those accounts, remains entirely in the Sterling Family Trust. And I still own 100% of the voting shares. I am the sole trustee. They do not own a single piece of this empire, Kendra. They are just employees. They are employees who have been stealing from their boss. The magnitude of his power sent a shockwave through my system. Elias and Jamal had spent the last 5 years treating me like a failure, looking down their noses at my independent success, while standing on a floor that could be pulled out from under them at any second. They had abandoned the true king of the family to freeze in the dark, completely unaware that he still held the executioner's sword. "We can freeze the accounts," I said, my mind racing with the legal implications. "Grandpa, we can cut off their access right now. We can fire them both for gross embezzlement. They will be stranded in Switzerland without a single dollar to their names. We can take everything back." Silas looked down at me, and the coldness in his eyes shifted into something infinitely more dangerous. He reached over my shoulder and placed his hand on the mouse pad. "We will deal with their stolen vacation soon enough," he said, his voice dropping to a low, terrifying rumble. "But that is not why I called you to this table, Kendra. Stealing from me is one thing, but they crossed a line that I will not forgive." He guided the cursor away from the main financial ledgers and scrolled down to the very bottom of the directory. There was a single isolated subfolder sitting apart from the rest of the corporate documents. My blood ran completely cold as I read the label. It was titled with my full legal name. Silas clicked the folder open. "They did not just steal from me, baby girl," he whispered, the steady calm of his voice making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Look at what your golden boy brother did in your name." I double-clicked the folder bearing my legal name. Inside sat a single digital file labeled as a commercial bridge loan agreement. The prominent logo of an elite Atlanta financial institution sat at the very top of the page. I scrolled down the document, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon until I hit the principal amount. $250,000. My chest tightened as if an invisible band had just snapped around my ribs. I kept scrolling, flying past the amortization schedules and severe liability clauses until I reached the final signatory page. There, sitting right next to Jamal's messy, arrogant scrawl, was my full name. It was my signature. It was not a clumsy imitation. It was a flawless, high-resolution digital replication of my exact handwriting. He forged my signature. I whispered the reality of the crime, freezing the blood in my veins. He actually forged my signature as a corporate co-signer. Silas leaned heavily on the cold marble counter, his jaw tight. "Your brother needed a clean guarantor, Kendra. He has completely maxed out every single corporate credit line I ever established for that company. His personal credit is an absolute wasteland of deferred payments and luxury leases he cannot actually afford. But you have spent the last 10 years operating strictly in the black. Your art authentication firm is spotless. You have zero debt. You were the perfect, unsuspecting mark." I stared at the glowing screen, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm. I pulled up the specific repayment terms. The loan had been taken out 6 months ago, right around the exact same time Jamal and Chloe announced they were upgrading to a massive 6-bedroom estate in a gated community just to impress her parents. The document clearly stated that the loan was secured against the personal assets of the co-signer in the event of a primary default. I checked the current status of the loan on the bank's secure portal attached within the folder. A bright red warning banner flashed across the top of the page. "Delinquent." The loan was set to enter absolute default in exactly 5 days. "If this defaults on Friday, the bank is going to come after me," I said, my voice rising as panic threatened to break through my carefully maintained composure. "They are going to seize my personal accounts. They will seize everything attached to your social security number." Silas corrected, his tone grim and absolute. "That is exactly how a commercial lien works, baby girl." A wave of sheer, terrifying nausea washed over me. Jamal did not just steal my credit history. He was about to destroy the single greatest achievement of my entire life. For years, I had operated my appraisal business out of highly secure rented storage facilities and temporary office spaces, saving every single dollar I earned from authenticating rare historical pieces for private collectors. Navigating the elite art world as a Black woman meant I had to be twice as good and work 3 times as hard just to get a foot in the door. Just 3 weeks ago, I had finally achieved my ultimate goal. I purchased a stunning historic brick-and-mortar gallery space in downtown Atlanta. I bought it in pure cash. It was completely mind-free and clear, intended to be the permanent headquarters for my firm. I had not told my parents about the gallery. I knew Elias would immediately demand I hire Jamal as my legal counsel or insist I host Chloe's pretentious charity events for free just to boost their social standing among her white old money relatives. I kept my success entirely to myself to protect it from their constant greed. But now, because my name was illegally tied to this fraudulent loan, that gallery was sitting right in the crosshairs of a major banking institution. If Jamal missed this final Friday deadline, the bank would place an aggressive lien on my building by next Monday morning. I would lose my business, my property, and my spotless professional reputation, all in one devastating sweep. He used my life's work to fund his fake lifestyle, I said, my hands balling into fists on the marble countertop. He committed federal wire fraud to keep Chloe draped in designer labels and to make her parents think he is some kind of corporate titan. He is going to let me lose my gallery so he can ski in the Swiss Alps and pretend he belongs in their tax bracket. He thinks you will never find out until the bank knocks on your front door, Silas said. He thinks you are just the quiet, struggling sister who will take the fall because you have always been the family scapegoat. Elias and Jamal have spent your entire life convincing you that your needs do not matter. They expect you to panic fold and quietly figure out a way to pay it off just to protect the Sterling family name from a public scandal. I looked at the forged signature again. The absolute audacity of it burned through the last remaining shreds of my familial loyalty. Jamal had crossed a legal and moral line that could never be uncrossed. This was not just typical sibling rivalry or parental favoritism. This was a calculated criminal attack on my livelihood. He had weaponized my own responsibility and hard work against me. He knew I had the assets to cover his failure, and he felt entirely entitled to steal them. I am not taking the fall for this, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. I am not losing a single brick of my gallery for a man who left his own grandfather to freeze in the dark. Silas nodded slowly, a dark, approving glint in his eyes. That is exactly what I needed to hear. Right at that exact moment, the harsh buzz of my cell phone vibrating against the marble island shattered the tense silence in the kitchen. I glanced down at the screen. The notification popped up from the group text thread my mother had aggressively named Sterling Family Empire. For the past 5 days, I had muted the chat to avoid the constant barrage of their luxury vacation photos, while I was stuck in Atlanta preparing for what I thought would be a grueling week of medical caregiving. But the notification banner flashed brightly in the dim kitchen light, impossible to ignore. I picked up the phone and tapped the screen. It was a new photo from my mother, Vivian. The image showed Jamal and Chloe standing at the peak of a breathtaking snow-covered mountain in the Swiss Alps. They were both wearing brand new matching designer ski suits, holding expensive custom snowboards. Jamal had his arm wrapped tightly around Chloe's waist, flashing a brilliant $1 million smile at the camera. Chloe was leaning into him, looking every bit the pampered heiress she was, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband was a criminal masquerading as an executive. Beneath the photo, my mother had typed out a caption accompanied by a string of prayer hand emojis. So blessed to have a successful son who takes such good care of his family and treats his wife like an absolute queen. God is so good to the Sterlings. I stared at the message, reading the words over and over again until they burned into my retinas. The sheer blinding hypocrisy of it was suffocating. My mother was praising the son who had abandoned her own father in a freezing, unheated house. She was celebrating the financial success of a man who was actively committing felony fraud to maintain his lavish facade. She was bragging about the luxury vacation that was entirely funded by stealing from the family company and forging my signature on a $250,000 loan. They were standing on top of a mountain, literally and figuratively, while actively plotting to bury me under an avalanche of their own debt. I looked up from the phone, my vision narrowing into sharp, absolute focus. I met my grandfather's gaze across the cold kitchen island. The fear and shock I had felt just moments ago were completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve that I had never experienced before. They had underestimated me for 33 years. They thought I was the weak, discardable daughter. They were about to find out exactly what happens when you push the scapegoat to the absolute edge. I shoved my phone away, sliding it across the freezing marble island. The notification light kept flashing, a relentless strobe illuminating the dark kitchen. My mother Vivian was flooding the Sterling Family Empire group chat with pictures of their luxury ski trip. I refused to open them. I refused to let their curated delusions distract me from the ticking time bomb currently buried inside my laptop. I needed to understand exactly how much damage Jamal had done and how much time I actually had left to fix it. I opened a new tab on my browser and logged directly into my private business accounts. The numbers staring back at me were the sum total of my entire adult life. I looked at the cash reserves I had painstakingly built for my art authentication firm over the last decade. I pulled up the digital deed to my new downtown gallery space. It was a beautiful exposed brick warehouse in the historic arts district. It was my absolute sanctuary. I had purchased it entirely in cash just 3 weeks ago. It was supposed to be the permanent physical headquarters for my growing firm. If Jamal's fraudulent commercial loan defaulted on Friday, the bank would not just politely ask for the money. They would immediately freeze my operational accounts by Monday morning. They would slap a massive commercial lien on my gallery. My reputation in the high-stakes fine art world, an industry built entirely on airtight trust, absolute discretion, and financial solvency, would shatter instantly. Private collectors do not hire authenticators who are embroiled in federal bank seizures and fraud investigations. Jamal was not just stealing $250,000. He was actively destroying my name, my livelihood, and my spotless professional reputation just to fund his pathetic masquerade. He was willing to burn my entire world to the ground so he could afford designer ski gear. A sharp, distinct chime cut through my racing thoughts. It was not a group chat notification. It was a direct message. I glanced at the screen. The sender was Chloe. My stomach twisted with instant visceral annoyance. I tapped the message open, bracing myself for her usual brand of passive-aggressive nonsense. The message read, "Make sure the heat is completely off in the guest rooms so you do not run up Jamal's utility bill, sweetie. Also, wipe down the baseboards in the main hallway before we get back. The housekeeper called out last week and the dust is triggering my allergies. Thanks." I read the text again, my jaw clenching so tight my teeth physically ached. I looked across the kitchen island at Grandpa Silas. He was watching my face, his sharp dark eyes missing absolutely nothing. "Listen to this," I said, my voice dangerously flat. I read Chloe's text aloud, letting every condescending word hang in the freezing air of the kitchen. Silas let out a low, disgusted scoff. "She speaks to you like you are the hired help," he said, his voice rumbling with quiet fury. "She always has," I replied, tossing the phone back onto the counter. "Since the very first day Jamal brought her to Sunday dinner. She handed me her empty wine glass and told me to wash it while my mother watched and said absolutely nothing. Jamal allows it because her last name opens doors at the local country club. He thinks having a wealthy white wife with an old money trust fund gives him a pedigree he cannot buy. He trades my dignity to keep her comfortable. He lets her disrespect me because defending me would mean standing up to her family." Silas leaned heavily on the marble, gripping the edge of the counter. "Your brother traded his own soul a long time ago. He thinks bowing to her family makes him an equal in their eyes. He is a court jester in a designer suit." "She actually believes this is Jamal's house," I said, pointing up at the vaulted ceiling. "She thinks he pays the utility bills. She thinks he is bankrolling this entire estate and taking care of you out of the goodness of his heart. They are living a completely fabricated life funded by your stolen legacy and my forged signature. She has no idea her husband is a broke criminal." I walked around the island, pacing the length of the kitchen to keep the adrenaline from overwhelming my system. I recounted to Silas how Chloe had once intentionally spilled red wine on a vintage silk dress I wore to their engagement party, claiming I looked too flashy for a simple family gathering. Jamal had actually defended her. He pulled me aside and told me I needed to tone down my personal style to make his new bride feel secure. It was never about her security. It was about their dominance. It was about reminding the strong, independent black woman in the room that she was supposed to shrink herself so the golden boy and his fragile wife could shine. They constantly needed me to be smaller so they could feel bigger. They really think I am just going to fold, I told Silas, stopping my pacing and meeting his unyielding gaze. They think I am going to panic, drain my business accounts, and quietly pay off this fraudulent loan just to avoid a public scandal. They expect me to protect the Sterling family name just like Vivian always taught me to do. They think I will swallow the abuse just to keep the peace. Vivian taught you to be a shield for men who do not respect you, Silas said sharply, his voice echoing in the cold room. I am telling you to be a sword. Before I could respond to my grandfather's command, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was the group chat. The notification flashed brightly across the locked screen. I picked it up. It was a message from Jamal sent to the entire family. I opened the chat, my eyes narrowing as I read his words. His message read, "By the way, Ken checked the mail on the console in the foyer. There is a bank notice with your name on it. Deal with it. I am busy hitting the slopes." I stared at the glowing screen of my phone as Jamal's text sat there at the bottom of the group chat. Deal with it, I am busy hitting the slopes. The sheer audacity of his words burned through the freezing air of the kitchen. He was not asking for a favor, he was issuing a command. He truly believed that he could commit federal wire fraud, steal my identity, and simply assign me the task of cleaning up his catastrophic mess, like I was his personal assistant. I looked up and met Grandpa Silas's eyes across the marble island. He gave me a single sharp nod. "Do not hold back," he said softly. I looked back down at the screen. My fingers flew across the glass keyboard. I did not text him privately. I typed my response directly into the Sterling Family Empire group chat for everyone to see, including my mother and his precious wife, Chloe. I typed exactly this. I am looking at a $250,000 defaulted commercial loan with my perfectly forged signature, Jamal. Explain. I hit send. I watched the small indicator at the bottom of the screen. Delivered. Read by Vivian. Read by Jamal. Read by Chloe. For exactly 8 seconds, the chat was completely dead. There were no typing bubbles. There were no defensive replies. The silence was absolute and heavy. Then less than 10 seconds later, my phone erupted in my hand. The incoming call screen flashed brightly, illuminating the dark kitchen. It was not Jamal calling to apologize or beg for forgiveness. It was my father, Elias. I answered the call and put it on speaker, setting the phone flat on the cold marble countertop so Silas could hear every single word of the betrayal. "Kendra, what is wrong with you?" my father bellowed the second the line connected. His voice was deafening, echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the dark, freezing house. The background noise of the Swiss ski lodge was entirely absent. He had clearly stepped away into a private room to scream at me. "How dare you send a text like that in the family chat? Chloe is in that chat. Her parents could be looking at her phone. Are you completely out of your mind?" I leaned forward, resting my hands flat on the counter. He committed a felony, Dad. I kept my voice dangerously low, perfectly composed, despite the rage vibrating through my chest. Jamal forged my signature on a $250,000 commercial loan. It is defaulting in 5 days. He used my social security number to steal operating capital. He did not steal anything, Elias snapped, cutting me off with the aggressive, booming tone he used to intimidate his corporate rivals. It is called bridging capital, Kendra. Jamal needed liquid assets to secure his buy-in for the new real estate venture with Chloe's family. He needed a clean guarantor because the logistics firm credit lines were temporarily tied up. We are building generational wealth here. We are securing a seat at a table that people like us are usually locked out of. Chloe's family comes from old money, Kendra. They do not understand the struggles we face. We have to present a flawless front. If Jamal goes into that real estate deal looking like he lacks capital, they will cut him out and they will cut me out. We have spent 3 years courting these people, hosting them at the country club, paying for their dinners, just to get a foot in the door. You are going to throw all of that away because you are too selfish to honor a simple family obligation. You are supposed to be supporting your brother, not acting like a hysterical child over a paperwork technicality. I stared at the phone, the physical manifestation of my father's absolute delusion staring right back at me. A paperwork technicality. That is what he called identity theft. You allowed him to forge my name, I asked, the reality settling over me like a heavy weight. You knew he did this. You helped him plan it. You owe this family your good credit, Elias shouted, his voice vibrating with arrogant entitlement. I built this family from nothing. I put a roof over your head. I allowed you to live in the city and play with your little art authentication hobby, while Jamal does the real work of securing our legacy. You owe your entire life to the sterling name. Jamal is about to finalize a massive deal with his father-in-law. We cannot afford any distractions right now. If you make a scene and blow this up, the investment falls apart. Chloe's family will walk away and we will lose the contract. You will quietly call the bank on Monday morning and you will arrange a payment plan. You will take the fall for this loan and you will do it without another word of complaint. I looked at Silas. My grandfather was gripping the edge of the island so tightly, his knuckles were white, his face a mask of cold fury. I turned my attention back to the speakerphone. I am not taking the fall for a crime I did not commit. I said my words, clipping the freezing air. I am not draining my business accounts to pay for Jamal's luxury ski trips and designer snowboards. I built my firm with my own blood and sweat. I will not let you tear it down to impress white people who do not even respect you. If you do not fix this by Monday, I will ruin you, Elias threatened, dropping his voice into a vicious, sinister snarl. Do you hear me, Kendra? I know every major gallery owner in Buckhead. I play golf with the board members of the High Museum. I know the private collectors who pay for your appraisals. If you ruin your brother's deal, I will personally see to it that your business is permanently blacklisted in Atlanta. I will tell them you are emotionally unstable. I will tell them you forge your own authentication documents. I will burn your professional reputation to the ground and you will be back to waiting tables by the end of the month. You do not cross me. You do not cross this family. The threat was designed to break me entirely. It was the exact same manipulative tactic he used when I was 22, pulling my law school tuition to keep me in line, reminding me that my survival depended entirely on his goodwill. He wanted me to panic. He expected me to cry, to beg, to instantly apologize for stepping out of line. He thought my independence was a fragile little thing he could crush with a few phone calls to his wealthy, influential friends. He thought the fear of losing my art authentication firm, the business I had spent a decade nurturing into a highly respected enterprise, would force me into total submission. But I was not 22 anymore. I owned a thriving business. I owned my own commercial building in cash. And most importantly, I was sitting across from the man who actually owned the empire Elias was currently pretending to rule. My father had absolutely no idea that the ground he was standing on belonged to the man he had left to freeze in a dark room. I did not yell back. I did not cry. I did not beg for his understanding. I reached out and rested my fingertip just millimeters above the glowing red end call button on the screen. Does Chloe's father know his future business partner is currently committing felony wire fraud? I asked, my tone completely devoid of any emotion. Dead silence fell over the line. The heavy, suffocating quiet of a man who suddenly realizes the person he is threatening is holding a loaded gun to his head. The silence on the line stretched out heavy and thick, filling the freezing air of the kitchen. For 5 agonizing seconds, all I could hear was the ragged, uneven sound of my father breathing through the speakerphone. He was panicking. The polished, untouchable facade of the Sterling family patriarch had just cracked wide open. He had expected me to cower, to apologize for daring to question my golden child brother. He certainly had not expected me to possess the exact terminology of the crime Jamal was committing, nor the understanding of how it would obliterate their desperate alliance with Chloe's wealthy white family. When Elias finally found his voice, it was not the measured, confident baritone he used to command corporate boardrooms. It was a vicious, trembling snarl. "You listen to me," he hissed, the words dripping with pure venom. You will not breathe a single word of this to anyone. You will not call the bank. You will not contact Chloe's father. You are going to log into your little business account, and you are going to cover that defaulted loan by Monday morning. If you ruin this trip for Jamal, if you jeopardize this investment and embarrass us in front of these people, you are entirely dead to this family." He did not stop there. The panic bleeding into his voice morphed into desperate authoritarian rage. He needed to reassert his dominance to remind me of my place at the absolute bottom of the family hierarchy. "And do not think you can hide from the consequences, Kendra!" He shouted, the audio distorting from the sheer volume of his voice. "You are standing in my house. You are sleeping under my roof because you have nowhere else to go. Enjoy playing nursemaid in the dark, because the absolute second our flight touches down in Atlanta, I am calling security to drag you out by your hair. I will throw you and your suitcases out onto the street. You will be completely cut off. You will have nothing. Do not test me." A sharp click echoed through the kitchen. The line went completely dead. He hung up. I stood motionless, staring at the darkened screen of my phone resting on the cold marble countertop. The dial tone was a dull, rhythmic buzz that seemed to amplify the freezing temperature of the room. My father had just threatened to render me homeless. He had used the very roof over my head as a weapon to force me into covering up a federal crime. It was a brutal, classic Elias Sterling tactic. Create a crisis, blame the victim, and threaten their basic survival until they comply. He genuinely believed I was the same terrified 22-year-old girl he had cut off from law school, the girl who had spent nights sleeping in her car because she dared to question his absolute authority. I slowly lifted my gaze from the phone. Across the massive kitchen island, Grandpa Silas was watching me. His posture was rigid, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that could melt the frost creeping up the windows. He had heard every single word. He had listened to his own son threaten to throw his granddaughter onto the street to protect a thief. I let out a slow, steady breath. The fear Elias had tried to instill in me simply did not exist. Instead, a hollow glacial calm settled perfectly over my chest. The little girl who used to cry for her father's approval was completely dead. In her place was a woman who had built an elite authentication firm from scratch, a woman who knew exactly how to dismantle a forgery. And my entire family was a forgery. "They think I am defenseless," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "They think I am still begging for a seat at their table." Silas did not offer a word of comfort. Comfort was for the weak, and right now we were preparing for war. He turned away from the island and walked deliberately toward the heavy oak cabinetry lining the back wall of the kitchen. He reached up, his movements fluid and precise, and opened a false panel hidden behind the decorative crown molding. He retrieved something dark and heavy, carrying it back to the marble counter. He placed it down under the dim glow of the emergency lighting. It was a thick, weathered, leather-bound master ledger. It was not a digital file or a printed spreadsheet. It was the original physical manifestation of the Sterling family wealth. The pages were edged in faded gold, holding 50 years of corporate history, account numbers, routing codes, and trust authorizations that only the true king of the empire possessed. Silas rested his large, calloused hand flat against the worn leather cover. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with calculated, unyielding vengeance. "Elias thinks this is his house," Silas said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, dangerous rumble. "He thinks the walls surrounding us belong to him because I allowed him to change the locks and pick out the curtains. He thinks the money paying for Jamal's luxury ski chalet and Chloe's designer lifestyle simply generates itself from his sheer brilliance. They have spent 5 years treating my legacy like an endless personal bank account, convinced that the man who built it was too blind to see them picking his pockets." Silas slid the heavy leather-bound ledger slowly across the smooth marble surface. It stopped directly in front of my folded hands, heavy with the weight of absolute destruction. "They wanted a freezing, helpless old man and an obedient, broken daughter." Silas continued, a dark, predatory smile spreading across his face. "But they forgot one crucial detail about the money they are currently burning through in Switzerland. I am the sole signatory on the corporate accounts. I control the holding trust. Every single credit card currently sitting in Jamal and Elias's wallets is tied to a central operational fund that I can freeze with a single phone call. I stared at the ledger, the raw power of what it represented surging through my veins. It was the ultimate kill switch. My family was currently thousands of miles away, completely reliant on stolen corporate funds to maintain their facade in front of Chloe's elite old money parents. If we severed their access, the illusion would instantly shatter. They would be stranded, exposed, and entirely ruined in a foreign country. They would have to explain to Chloe's wealthy father why their cards were suddenly declining at a luxury ski resort. Silas reached out and tapped the heavy cover of the ledger, sealing their fate with a single gesture. By Friday, they will not even own the designer snow boots they are wearing, Silas said, his voice ringing with absolute terrifying authority. Call Desmond. Christmas morning broke over Atlanta with a bitter, freezing chill. There were no presents under a tree. There was no holiday music echoing through the halls. There was just the steady hum of my laptop and the sharp clink of ice against crystal as Silas poured himself a morning bourbon. My phone buzzed constantly on the Marble Island. Vivian was uploading a live video to her social media. She was sitting on a heated balcony overlooking the Swiss Alps, laughing loudly as a private chef served them breakfast. She tagged Chloe in the video, praising her beautiful daughter-in-law for giving the Sterling family such a magical Christmas. I watched the video for exactly 2 seconds before swiping it away. They were drinking mimosas funded by stolen money while I was preparing to hand them a federal indictment. At exactly 9 in the morning, heavy, confident knocks rattled the front doors. I unlocked them to find Desmond standing on the snow-covered porch. He was wearing a tailored wool overcoat holding 2 thick leather briefcases, looking like a man arriving to a corporate execution. Desmond is a ruthless corporate attorney, and he has been my closest friend for a decade. When I was 22 and my father violently cut my law school funding, Desmond was the one who helped me secure the commercial leases for my art appraisal business. He knows exactly how Elias operates. He knows the arrogance, the manipulation, and the absolute obsession with social status. I did not even have to explain the depths of their betrayal on the phone. I just told him Jamal forged my signature on a $250,000 commercial loan. Desmond canceled his holiday flight to Chicago, threw on a suit, and drove straight to the estate. He stepped into the freezing foyer, barely reacting to the plunging temperature of the house. We did not exchange pleasantries. We walked straight into the formal living room and turned the massive mahogany dining table into a war room. Silas took his seat at the head of the table, opening his leather-bound master ledger. Desmond unlatched his briefcases, pulling out stacks of legal pads and powering up his encrypted laptop. For the next 3 hours, the three of us executed a brutal forensic audit of the Sterling freight and logistics firm. It was a digital bloodbath. Silas provided the foundational trust documents, proving his sole ownership, while I cross-referenced the shell vendor accounts with the fraudulent bank loans. Desmond went straight for the digital footprint of the forged loan agreement. He isolated the specific electronic certificate that carried my replicated signature. He pulled the metadata and traced the IP address of the device used to submit the final authorization. Desmond let out a harsh, humorless laugh. He turned his screen toward me, tapping his pen against the glass. "Your brother is an absolute amateur," Desmond said, his voice laced with professional disgust. He did not even bother to use a virtual private network. The IP address on the forged signature traces directly back to the public Wi-Fi network at the Buckhead Country Club. Jamal committed federal wire fraud while sitting in the clubhouse dining room, probably drinking a martini paid for by the very company he is actively destroying. I stared at the screen, feeling a fresh wave of contempt for my brother. Jamal had always believed he was untouchable because Elias constantly shielded him from the consequences of his own mediocrity. He honestly thought he could steal my identity between rounds of golf and simply bully me into paying the bill. "This is sloppy," Desmond continued, typing rapidly into his secure portal. To a trained forensic eye, the signature velocity and pressure points are completely wrong. But it was clean enough to fool the automated banking system because your credit score is flawless, Kendra. The bank saw your spotless financial history and approved the bridge loan in 24 hours. The good news is that this makes my job incredibly easy. I can guarantee a felony conviction for this level of identity theft. But there is a catch. Desmond looked up at Silas and me. Jamal is desperate. He secured this bridge loan to temporarily cover a massive hole in the corporate accounts. If he manages to finalize his new real estate deal with Chloe's father this weekend, he might secure enough capital to quietly pay this loan off before the bank flags the default. If he pays it off, the paper trail gets muddy, and the bank loses its incentive to prosecute. We have to strike immediately. We have to tear down the entire financial structure before they can cover their tracks. Silas nodded, his expression completely devoid of mercy. Tear it down, he commanded. Find every single dollar they drained from my company. I want to know exactly what they bought with my sweat. Desmond dove deeper into the main operational accounts, routing through the administrative portal that Silas had unlocked. The room fell into a tense, heavy silence, broken only by the rapid clattering of Desmond's keyboard. I watched my friend work his eyes, scanning lines of code and banking transaction histories with predatory speed. Suddenly, Desmond stopped typing. The frantic clicking of the keys ceased entirely, leaving a sudden, suffocating quiet in the room. He leaned closer to the screen, his brow furrowing in deep concentration. He highlighted a specific line in the corporate ledger and ran a quick cross-reference against the state banking registry. He let out a slow, sharp exhale. He did not look angry. He looked genuinely shocked. Desmond rotated his laptop, sliding it across the polished mahogany table so it sat directly between me and Silas. He pointed to a massive outgoing wire transfer that had been initiated just 24 hours ago, right before Elias and Jamal boarded their flight to Europe. The numbers were staggering. The routing number on this transfer does not match the logistics payroll, Desmond said, his voice tight with disbelief. It does not match any of your approved vendor accounts either. He looked directly into my eyes, his expression completely deadly. Kendra, look at where the logistics operating funds went yesterday. I leaned over Desmond's shoulder, my eyes locking onto the glowing screen. The transaction history was highlighted in a harsh, glaring yellow block. The date stamp showed the transfer was initiated exactly 24 hours ago, mere hours before Elias and Jamal boarded their transatlantic flight. The principal amount was staggering. $300,000 had been drained from the primary operating account in a single keystroke. I traced the routing information across the digital ledger. The receiving entity was not a fuel supplier. It was not a shipping contractor or a commercial insurance provider. The money had been wired directly into a private holding account registered to a luxury commercial real estate development firm based in Charleston. I knew that firm. Anyone who operated in the high-end art and real estate circles in the South knew that name. It was the conglomerate owned exclusively by Chloe's father. Desmond rapidly cross-referenced the corporate credit card statements linked to the same operating account. He pulled up the pending charges from the last 72 hours. First-class Delta tickets to Geneva for 4 adults, a $50,000 weekly rental for a private luxury chalet in Zermatt, tens of thousands of dollars spent at designer ski boutiques right inside the airport terminal. Every single dime of their European winter wonderland was billed directly to a corporate expense card tethered to sterling freight and logistics. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Vivian had the absolute nerve to leave a handwritten note on my kitchen island claiming Chloe's parents had graciously paid for the chalet. She bragged about the networking opportunity. It was all a complete fabrication. Jamal was footing the entire bill with stolen money just to maintain the illusion that he was a wealthy corporate titan who could treat his white in-laws to a lavish European getaway. My parents were so desperate to secure their proximity to Chloe's old money pedigree that they willingly turned a blind eye while Jamal robbed his own family blind. But the vacation expenses were just a drop in the bucket compared to the massive wire transfer. Desmond's fingers flew across the keyboard, hacking his way into Jamal's archived corporate emails. He bypassed the basic security protocols in seconds and opened a PDF attachment labeled as a joint venture term sheet. Desmond began reading the legal clauses aloud, his voice growing tighter with every sentence. Jamal was not securing an investment from Chloe's father to save the logistics firm. It was the exact opposite. Jamal was bleeding his own grandfather's legacy entirely dry to buy an equity stake in his father-in-law's latest real estate venture. Chloe's father had demanded a $500,000 buy-in for a minority partnership in a new commercial development. Jamal was using stolen company funds to literally purchase a seat at a table with people who privately mocked his background. I remembered sitting at Thanksgiving dinner last year listening to Chloe complain about the loud music in our neighborhood, while Jamal nodded along, eagerly agreeing with her just to appease her delicate sensibilities. He was so desperate to be accepted by her elite social circle that he was willing to commit federal wire fraud to pay the entry fee. Silas stood up the legs of his heavy oak chair, scraping violently against the hardwood floor. He walked over to the screen, his dark eyes scanning the term sheet. The silence radiating from him was terrifying. He had spent his entire life fighting institutional racism, battling banks that point-blank refused to lend to a black man in the 1970s. He had sacrificed his own blood to build a self-sustaining empire so his descendants would never have to beg for a seat at anyone else's table. And here was his grandson, taking the fruits of that grueling labor and handing it over to a wealthy white family just to buy their conditional acceptance. "They are laughing at him," Silas said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the room. Chloe's father knows exactly what he is doing. He is letting Jamal buy his way into a terrible deal because he knows Jamal is too desperate for validation to read the fine print. He is draining my company to line his own pockets, and your brother is handing him the cash with a smile on his face. I stared at the dates on the term sheet, the gears in my mind snapping into place. The sudden realization hit me with the force of a freight train. The puzzle was finally complete. I pointed at the screen, tracing the timeline connecting the massive wire transfer to the fraudulent document we had found earlier. The $250,000 commercial loan Jamal forged in my name was not a random act of desperation. I said, the absolute clarity of the situation sharpening my focus. It was a calculated bridge payment. Desmond looked up from the keyboard, his eyes narrowing as he followed my logic. "Explain," he demanded. "Look at the payment schedule on the real estate term sheet," I instructed, tapping the screen. Jamal promised his father-in-law the second installment of the buy-in by the end of this month, but the logistics operating accounts were already empty. He drained the last of the liquid cash to pay for the first-class flights and the ski chalet in Switzerland. He knew the bank was going to flag any more outgoing wire transfers from the corporate account because there was nothing left to draw from. Jamal panicked. I continued, the adrenaline surging through my system as the entire scope of his criminal stupidity laid itself bare. If he missed that real estate payment, Chloe's father would instantly realize Jamal was a fraud with zero actual capital. Chloe would find out her husband was completely broke. The entire country club facade would shatter while they were trapped together in a snowy chalet. He needed liquid cash instantly to make the payment and save his own skin. But his personal credit is garbage, and Elias has maxed out all the other company lines. So he looked at the only person in this family who actually works for a living. He forged my name to secure that commercial bridge loan, using my flawless credit history to get an instant approval from the bank. Desmond leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow, heavy breath. He deposited the loan payout directly into a secondary shell account to cover the stolen funds he wired to Chloe's. Father Desmond confirmed. He used your identity to plug a hole in a sinking ship. If that loan defaults on Friday, the bank will seize your gallery to recoup their losses, and Jamal walks away clean with his new real estate partnership intact. If the money stops, the entire facade crumbles, I said, the cold reality solidifying in my chest. Jamal built a house of cards on top of my name. He expects me to quietly take the fall and absorb the debt just to keep the Sterling family secrets buried. He expects me to sacrifice my gallery, my business, and my entire future so he can keep playing a rich man on the slopes of Geneva. Desmond slid a fresh stack of legal affidavits across the mahogany dining table, the crisp white paper glaring under the harsh war room lights. He pulled his tablet closer, his fingers flying across the encrypted legal portal as he finalized the emergency filings. Every document had been meticulously structured to shield my life's work while laying the groundwork for an ironclad prosecution against my brother. First, Desmond established the formal affidavit of identity theft and forgery. Attached to it were the high-resolution forensic analysis of my handwriting, the metallic metadata proving the forged signature was executed from the Buckhead Country Club's public network, and my spotless financial statements proving I had zero prior knowledge of the commercial loan. This affidavit was immediately flagged for the bank's fraud division and the Federal Financial Crimes Task Force. By filing this directly, we legally firewalled my personal Social Security number, my liquid business reserves, and my newly acquired downtown gallery space. The bank's collections department would no longer look at me as a delinquent co-signer. They would view Jamal as an active felon who had committed identity theft to defraud a financial institution. Next, Desmond pulled up the corporate governance injunctions. Because Silas held 100% of the voting shares in the Sterling Family Trust, he possessed the sole legal authority to revoke all operational powers granted to Elias and Jamal. Desmond drafted an immediate emergency resolution declaring an internal audit due to grand larceny, breach of fiduciary duty, and suspected corporate embezzlement. The resolution formally stripped Elias of his chief executive officer title and terminated Jamal from his role as vice president of operations with immediate effect. Desmond leaned back in his leather chair, the glow of his laptop screen reflecting off his sharp eyes. He looked between me and Grandpa Silas, his expression unreadable, professional, and entirely deadly. "Everything is staged and ready," Desmond said, his voice quiet but echoing clearly in the cold room. "The moment I submit these emergency injunctions to the banking network and file the trust resolution, the legal gears will turn instantaneously. The bank will place a temporary administrative freeze on every single master corporate account registered under Sterling Freight and Logistics." He paused, resting his hands flat on the polished table. "That means every line of credit, every corporate expense card, and every secondary debit card tied to those operational funds will be frozen within seconds," Desmond continued. "Your father and brother are currently sitting in an ultra-luxury chalet in Zermatt. They have 5-star dinners scheduled, private ski instructors booked, and a massive resort tab accumulating by the hour. If I hit submit right now, their cards will decline the next time they try to pay for a single cup of coffee, a ski lift pass, or their hotel bill. They will be stranded in Switzerland with zero access to the company's money, completely exposed in front of Chloe's wealthy family." The gravity of the moment hung heavy in the air. This was the point of no return. Once that button was pressed, the illusion of the Sterling family empire would be shattered forever. There would be no private family conversations, no sweep-it-under-the-rug settlement, and no quiet excuses. My father and brother would be publicly humiliated in the exact arena where they had sacrificed their integrity to flex a fake lifestyle. I turned my head and looked at Grandpa Silas. My grandfather sat perfectly upright, his hands folded over the worn leather cover of his master ledger. The man who had spent 50 years bleeding for his family, the man who had been left to freeze in the dark on Christmas Eve with a paper-thin blanket over his knees, did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. He did not shed a tear for the son who had betrayed him or the grandson who had stolen his legacy. Silas slowly lifted his crystal glass, took a calm, deliberate sip of his top-shelf bourbon, and set it back down on the mahogany table with a sharp final clack. His face was set in unyielding stone. "Hit the button, counselor," Silas said, his deep baritone ringing through the house like a death knell. Desmond did not say another word. He hovered his cursor over the green execution icon on his encrypted screen and pressed enter. The digital confirmation flashed instantly across the screen. "Emergency injunction submitted. Account freeze initiated." For a few seconds, absolute silence blanketed the room. The trap had officially sprung thousands of miles away across the Atlantic Ocean, while my family was still sipping champagne on the snowy peaks of Europe. I reached for my phone on the table. The Sterling Family Empire group chat was still sitting open on my screen. I watched the thread silently waiting for the inevitable detonation. Less than 20 minutes passed before the quiet was shattered. My phone began vibrating violently against the wood, buzzing so hard it nearly slid off the table. The screen lit up with Jamal's name and picture. I did not answer. I let it ring until it went straight to voicemail. Less than 3 seconds later, it started ringing again. Then a barrage of text notifications began flooding the chat, popping up so fast, the screen was a blur of text. Jamal Ken, pick up the damn phone right now, Jamal. What the hell is going on with the corporate accounts? Jamal Kendra, answer your phone. Emergency. My phone rang again. This time, I tapped the screen, accepted the incoming call, and immediately put it on speaker, setting the phone right in the middle of the table between Silas Desmond and me. Kendra Jamal screamed through the speaker, his voice shrill, breathless, and completely hyperventilating. What did you do? What did you do to the banking portal? I leaned forward toward the microphone, my tone impossibly calm and completely icy. I did not do anything to the banking portal, Jamal. What seems to be the problem? Everything is declining, Jamal shrieked, the sounds of a crowded, echoing luxury hotel lobby visible in the background noise. Every single corporate card just got rejected at the front desk. We just finished a $3,000 lunch with Chloe's parents, and when I swiped the platinum card, the machine flagged it as restricted. I tried the backup card and it declined too. The resort manager is standing right here in front of everyone telling me the accounts have been frozen for suspected fraud. In the background, I could hear Chloe's sharp, panicked voice crying hysterically. This is so embarrassing, Jamal, do something. My dad is standing right here. They think we are broke. Jamal's voice came back on the line, raspy with pure terror. Kendra, you have administrative access through Grandpa's old files. You need to log in right now and transfer $50,000 from the reserve account to my personal card. They are threatening to call the local Swiss authorities if we do not settle the resort tab in 20 minutes. I looked at Silas, who was listening with a cold, satisfied glint in his dark eyes. Then I looked at Desmond, who gave me a subtle nod. I leaned closer to the phone and channeled my mother's exact dismissive, condescending tone from every single time she had brushed off my hard work. I do not know what to tell you, Jamal, I said softly, letting every word cut through the speaker like a blade. You really should have planned your vacation better. A real corporate executive would always have a backup plan. Try Ubering to the embassy. For the first 4 days following Desmond submitting the emergency injunctions, the Sterling Family Empire group chat was an absolute nightmare of unchecked arrogance. My phone lit up every single hour with a new barrage of high-definition photos and sickeningly sweet captions. I sat at the marble kitchen island, wrapped in a heavy wool sweater, drinking black coffee, while my mother Vivian documented every second of their fraudulent European winter wonderland. There was a photo of Jamal and Chloe clinking crystal flutes of vintage champagne in the back of a horse-drawn carriage. There was a video of Elias smoking a Cuban cigar on a heated terrace, loudly bragging to the camera about how hard work and family loyalty always pay off. They were practically bathing in stolen money. They were rubbing their counterfeit success in my face, deliberately trying to make me feel small, isolated, and punished for daring to question their authority. They had absolutely no idea that the financial ground beneath their designer snow boots had already been completely vaporized. Desmond had explained that international banking freezes can take up to 72 hours to fully propagate across foreign merchant systems, especially when dealing with high-tier corporate credit accounts that do not require daily authorizations. So I waited. Silas and I sat in that cavernous, freezing estate, tending to the fire, playing chess, and waiting for the digital guillotine to drop. Then came day 5. It started exactly like the others. At 8 in the morning, Atlanta time, Vivian posted a lengthy paragraph about how Chloe's father had just invited Jamal to a private high-stakes poker game at the resort casino. She added a string of diamond emojis and a comment about how proud she was that the Sterling men knew how to command a room filled with generational wealth. And then, abruptly, the notification stopped. The incessantly annoying ping of the group chat went completely dead. An hour passed, then 2 hours. The silence radiating from my phone was heavy, thick, and absolutely loaded with impending doom. I watched the screen, knowing exactly what was happening on the other side of the world. The resort management was running the final incidental authorizations for their luxury chalet. The 5-star restaurant was swiping the corporate platinum card for their massive lunch. The global financial system was finally catching up to Desmond's emergency injunction. I poured Silas a fresh glass of water and set it on the table. He looked at me, his dark eyes sharp and knowing. "The quiet is always the loudest part of the storm," Silas said, his voice a low, steady rumble. 10 minutes later, my phone began to vibrate violently against the wood. The screen flashed brightly, illuminating the dark room. It was an incoming international call. The caller ID displayed Jamal's face. He was smiling in the photo, wearing a tailored tuxedo from a gala I was not invited to. I did not reach for the phone. I leaned back in my chair, crossed my arms, and simply watched it ring. It rang 5 times before dropping to voicemail. 3 seconds later, it started vibrating again. I let it ring all the way through a second time, then a third. By the 5th consecutive call, I could practically feel the sheer unadulterated panic transmitting through the cellular signal. For 33 years, Jamal had expected me to jump at his every command. He expected me to answer on the first ring, ready to absorb whatever task or insult he decided to hurl my way. Not today. On the 10th call, I finally reached out and tapped the green button. I did not say hello. I did not offer a greeting. I just breathed quietly into the receiver and waited. Kendra Jamal screamed, his voice cracking with a level of raw, high-pitched terror I had never heard from him before. "Kendra, pick up the phone right now. Are you there? Answer me." "I am here, Jamal," I said, my tone perfectly flat, completely devoid of any sympathy. "What seems to be the urgency?" "You are interrupting my art appraisal work." "My cards are declining," Jamal shrieked, the audio distorting as he practically swallowed the microphone. "All of them. Every single corporate account is frozen. I am standing at the concierge desk of the ski resort, and the manager just cut my platinum card in half. He said the issuing bank placed a hard lock on the account for suspected federal embezzlement." "What did you do? What did you do to the banking portal?" I listened to the chaotic background noise filtering through the speaker. It was a symphony of destruction. I could hear the distinct sound of a crowded luxury lobby, people murmuring in French and German. And cutting right through the ambient noise was the sound of Chloe sobbing hysterically. "This is so embarrassing, Jamal." I heard Chloe wail, her voice shrill and dripping with absolute mortification. "My parents are standing right here. The concierge just told my father our credit is no good. They think we are broke criminals. Fix this right now, or I am calling a car to take me to the airport." Jamal sounded like he was on the verge of hyperventilating. "Kendra, you have to fix this immediately," he pleaded, his arrogance entirely stripped away, leaving nothing but naked desperation. "Chloe's dad just paid for our $3,000 lunch because my card was declined in front of the entire restaurant. He is looking at Elias like we are common street hustlers. The resort is threatening to call the local police and have us arrested for theft of services if we do not settle the $15,000 lodging tab by the end of the hour." I kept my silence, letting him drown in his own catastrophic failure. The man who had forged my signature to steal $250,000, the man who had let his wife treat me like a servant, was now begging me to save him from a Swiss jail cell. "You are the only one who can log into the secondary authentication portal," Jamal demanded, his tone shifting from pleading back to his usual entitled aggression. "I know you have money squirreled away from your little art business. You need to wire $15,000 from your personal savings directly to my debit account right this second. Do it now, Kendra. Pay the hotel bill before Chloe's father realizes I do not actually have the capital for his real estate venture. If you do not send me your money right now, my entire marriage is over." I stared at the phone, the absolute audacity of his demand cementing the final brick in his tomb. He was still trying to spend my money. He was still trying to use my life's work as a shield to protect his fragile ego and his fake proximity to whiteness. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the audio from the luxury Swiss ski resort crackling through the speaker. Jamal was completely out of breath, his voice strained with a pathetic, frantic energy that I had never heard from him before. He was genuinely expecting me to panic right alongside him. He truly believed that after a lifetime of treating me like an unwanted burden, I would instantly open my personal business accounts, drain the liquid capital I had secured through a decade of relentless hard work, and wire him $15,000 just to save his fragile ego in front of his wealthy white in-laws. I leaned back in my chair, resting my hands perfectly still on the freezing marble countertop. The air in the dark kitchen was absolutely silent, except for the desperate gasping sounds of my brother's hyperventilation transmitting through the phone. I looked across the island at Grandpa Silas. His dark eyes locked onto mine, giving me a single approving nod. It was a silent command to finish the execution. I took a slow, deep breath and completely detached myself from any lingering sense of familial obligation. I channeled my mother Vivian's exact dismissive tone from years past. I perfectly replicated the cold, unapologetic arrogance she used every single time I came to her for emotional or financial support. "I do not know what to tell you, Jamal," I said, letting the words drop into the speaker like shards of ice. "You must not have planned properly. A real man of business would have a safety net. Try Ubering to the embassy." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, profound, and deeply satisfying. The sheer shock of my response had literally stolen the breath from his lungs. For 5 long seconds, there was no background noise, no frantic pleading, just the sound of a man realizing that the sister he had designated as his lifelong punching bag was the one holding the match to his gasoline-soaked life. "Are you out of your mind?" Jamal finally shrieked, his voice cracking into a high pitch. "Kendra, this is not a joke. We are stranded in a foreign country. Chloe is having a full breakdown in the lobby. Her father is staring at me like I am a common criminal. The hotel manager is standing right next to me with security. You have to send the money right now. Stop being so dramatic and do what is best for this family." I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I just fed him another line straight from our father's playbook. "Life is not fair, Jamal," I replied, my voice dangerously smooth. "Actions have consequences. You chose to live beyond your means to impress people who do not actually respect you. You decided to commit felony wire fraud and forge my signature to cover your tracks. Now you have to face the results of your own poor decisions. I am just trying to motivate you to be better. That is what parents do, right?" I could hear the exact moment his brain short-circuited. He stammered, sputtering out half-formed syllables, unable to comprehend that his ultimate safety net had just violently retracted. Before Jamal could formulate a coherent sentence, a loud scuffle echoed through the phone. I heard the sharp sound of a physical struggle, a heavy thud, and then the distinct, thunderous voice of my father ripping the phone away from his golden boy. Elias grabbed the receiver, and the sheer volume of his rage actually vibrated the device on the marble counter. "Kendra," Elias bellowed, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "What the hell is going on with my corporate accounts? I just tried to log into the executive portal and my credentials have been completely wiped. The bank is telling the concierge that the holding trust placed a total administrative freeze on all operating funds." "What did you do to my company?" I smiled, a slow, cold expression that I felt all the way down to my bones. "It is not your company, Dad," I corrected him, maintaining that same lethal, icy composure. "It never was. It belongs to the Sterling Family Trust. You know, the trust you never actually bothered to read, because you were too busy spending money you did not earn to impress people who laugh at you behind closed doors." "Listen to me, you ungrateful failure," Elias screamed, completely losing any semblance of his polished corporate persona. He was no longer the untouchable patriarch. He was a desperate, cornered thief. "I am the chief executive officer of Sterling Freight and Logistics. I built everything you see. I put the food in your mouth and the clothes on your back. You are going to log into whatever backdoor system you hacked, and you are going to release my funds this exact second. If you do not wire the capital to clear this resort tab and fund Jamal's real estate venture with Chloe's father, I will fly back to Atlanta and I will destroy you." He was spitting his threats with such ferocity that the audio clipped, but the words held absolutely no power over me anymore. "I will burn your art business to the ground." Elias continued his tirade, his breathing ragged and heavy. I will ruin your reputation in every gallery in the South. I will personally see to it that you are evicted from my house and left to rot on the streets. You do not cross me. You do not touch my money." I let him scream. I let him empty his lungs, waiting until he paused to take a breath before I delivered the final, devastating reality check. "You have zero leverage." "Elias," I said quietly, leaning closer to the microphone, "you are currently standing in a Swiss ski lodge with a declined credit card, a fraudulent son, and a very angry, very wealthy white man who is about to realize his daughter married into a family of broke criminals. You are under active investigation for gross embezzlement, and Jamal is facing a federal indictment for identity theft. You cannot evict me from a house you no longer control, and you cannot destroy a business I built entirely without you. You have absolutely nothing left. I am your father." Elias roared, his voice cracking with a terrifying mixture of rage and absolute panic. "I demand you unlock those accounts right now, or so help me God." I stared at the phone, feeling the weight of 33 years of emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and constant agonizing disrespect simply evaporate into the cold air of the kitchen. "Have a safe flight home, Dad," I said. I reached out and pressed the red button. The call dropped. A profound, absolute silence returned to the cavernous living room. The persistent, frantic energy that had defined my family for my entire life was completely gone, severed by a single tap of my finger. I exhaled a long, steady breath, my shoulders dropping as the tension drained from my body. I had done it. I had looked the monsters of my childhood directly in the eyes, and I had shut the door in their faces. I looked up from the dark screen. Grandpa Silas was sitting perfectly still, a look of grim, absolute pride etched deeply into his weathered features. He raised his crystal glass of bourbon in a silent, solemn salute to my victory. To my left, the sharp, rhythmic whir of a portable printer broke the quiet. Desmond, who had been sitting silently at the mahogany dining table absorbing every single second of the confrontation, reached over and pulled a thick stack of freshly printed, legally binding documents from the tray. He gathered the warm papers, tapping them against the hard wood to align the edges perfectly. He stood up, his tailored suit immaculate, and walked over to the kitchen island. Desmond looked at me, a sharp, knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He slid the finalized legal packet directly across the marble, stopping it right next to my phone. "It is time to make it official." I stared down at the thick stack of legal documents Desmond had just slid across the cold marble of the kitchen island. The crisp white pages were covered in dense corporate legal jargon, but the bold heading at the top of the primary document was impossible to misinterpret. It was the formal, irrevocable transfer of the Sterling family trust. For my entire life, I had watched my father, Elias, parade around Atlanta, wielding this exact trust as a weapon. He used it to enforce compliance, to demand respect, and to starve me of my own college tuition simply because I refused to bow to his massive ego. He treated our family legacy like a dictatorship. Now, with a few strokes of a pen, that dictatorship was about to be completely dismantled. Grandpa Silas reached into the inner pocket of his tailored wool cardigan and pulled out a heavy gold-plated fountain pen. It was the exact same pen he had used to sign the original incorporation papers for his logistics firm 50 years ago. He did not hesitate. He did not ask for a moment to think it over. He uncapped the pen, leaned over the marble counter, and began to sign his name. I watched the dark ink bleed into the heavy paper. With the very first signature, Silas officially revoked every single operational power, financial proxy, and executive privilege previously granted to Elias. My father was instantly stripped of his title. He was no longer the chief executive officer of Sterling Freight and Logistics. He was nothing but an unemployed man currently stranded in a foreign country. With the second signature, Silas bypassed his arrogant son entirely. He officially transferred 100% of the voting shares, the holding company, and the master operational accounts directly into my name. Silas set the gold pen down and looked at me, his dark eyes shining with a fierce, unwavering pride. "It is yours now, Kendra," he said, his voice echoing with the weight of half a century of hard-won generational wealth. You are the sole chief executive officer and the majority shareholder of the Sterling Family Trust. Do not just manage it, rule it. A profound electric surge of absolute power coursed through my veins. The little girl who had been constantly told she was a useless disappointment was completely gone. The struggling student, who had been left to fend for herself because her father wanted to buy her brother a luxury sports car, had survived, thrived, and returned to conquer the entire empire. I had built a highly respected art authentication firm, from the ground up, completely self-funded, proving my business acumen to the elite private collectors of the world. Now I possessed the keys to the kingdom that had always been denied to me. Desmond did not pause to celebrate. He smoothly pulled the signed trust transfer aside and slid the second manila folder directly in front of me. The corporate restructuring was only the first half of the execution. It was time to deal with the criminal. This is the formal fraud declaration, Desmond said, his voice dropping into a cold, clinical register. I have compiled the forensic handwriting analysis, the network metadata from the Buckhead Country Club, and the comprehensive timeline of your brother's embezzlement. By signing this, you are officially attesting under penalty of perjury that you had zero prior knowledge of the $250,000 commercial bridge loan. I picked up the gold fountain pen. The metal was still warm from my grandfather's grip. I signed my name swiftly and decisively on the bottom line. Desmond immediately scanned the signed affidavit using his encrypted tablet. He logged into the secure portal for the Federal Financial Crimes Task Force and uploaded the entire dossier. He then routed the exact same packet directly to the Fraud Prevention Division of the commercial bank holding the defaulted loan. The submission progress bar crawled across his screen, hitting 100% with a soft, definitive chime. It is done, Desmond confirmed, closing the tablet. The legal firewall around your personal assets is now solid iron. The bank can no longer pursue your downtown gallery space or your business accounts to cover the default. Instead, they will redirect their entire collection apparatus squarely onto Jamal. The federal authorities now have a documented case of felony wire fraud and identity theft. Your brother is officially in the crosshairs. The sheer magnitude of the trap we had just successfully sprung settled over the freezing kitchen. Jamal thought he could use my clean credit to fund his fake lifestyle, desperate to buy a seat at the table with Chloe's wealthy, entitled white family. He thought he could rob his own grandfather blind and force his scapegoat sister to take the fall. He was about to return to American soil facing a federal indictment and a mountain of insurmountable debt. The facade he had sacrificed his own soul to build was completely obliterated. For the next hour, a heavy anticipatory silence reigned in the house. Desmond packed his briefcases, preparing the physical hard copies of the documents for the impending confrontation. Silas sat in his armchair by the dead fireplace, his posture relaxed for the first time in 6 months. I stood by the kitchen island, mentally preparing for the chaotic fallout that was rapidly approaching our front door. Then the harsh, sudden buzzing of my cell phone shattered the quiet. I looked down at the screen. It was not a group chat notification. It was a direct, private text message from Elias. The preview text on the locked screen was enough to tell me that the reality of their situation had finally brutally sunk in. I unlocked the phone and opened the message. The sheer desperation and venom dripping from his words painted a vivid picture of the absolute humiliation he had just endured in Switzerland. The text read, "We had to beg Chloe's father for a personal loan just to afford coach tickets to fly home early. Do you have any idea what you have done to us? You humiliated me in front of the exact people I have spent years trying to impress. You are an ungrateful, vicious failure. I am going to throw you out on the street the absolute second I walk through that front door. Pack your bags. You are dead to me." I read the words twice, letting the aggressive, empty threats wash over me. Elias was still trying to play the untouchable patriarch. He was still trying to wield a power he no longer possessed. He had just endured the ultimate humiliation of begging his wealthy white in-laws for travel money because his own son had stolen everything they had. And yet his first instinct was to blame me. He truly believed he was coming back to a house he owned, ready to exert his dominance over a daughter he thought was helpless. I looked around the freezing dark kitchen of the massive estate that now legally belonged entirely to me. I thought about the eviction notice Desmond had already drafted, currently resting safely inside his leather briefcase. I thought about Jamal's impending arrest and Chloe's inevitable realization that she had married a broke, desperate fraud. I did not feel a single ounce of fear. I did not feel an ounce of guilt. I walked over to the coffee maker, poured myself a fresh, steaming cup of black coffee, and took a slow, satisfying sip. I picked up my phone, a genuine cold smile spreading across my face. I tapped the screen and typed my response, my fingers moving with absolute unbothered calm. Drive safe. I will leave the porch light on. I took the heavy gold fountain pen from the marble counter and signed my name on the final line of the corporate transfer document. The dark ink dried quickly against the thick parchment sealing the fate of the Sterling family empire once and for all. Desmond collected the papers, sliding them back into his leather briefcase with a satisfying snap of the brass locks. The execution order was filed. The financial arteries were officially severed. All we had to do now was wait for the bodies to hit the floor. 48 agonizing hours passed. The rare winter storm blanketing Atlanta finally broke, leaving behind a bitter, biting cold that mirrored the exact atmosphere inside the estate. Silas and I did not leave the house. We spent the time repositioning the chessboard. We moved from the cold kitchen to the formal dining room, a massive space dominated by a 12-foot mahogany table that Elias had custom ordered specifically to intimidate his business rivals. Today it would serve as the altar for his own sacrifice. The heavy oak front doors burst open with a violent echoing crash that shook the crystal chandelier hanging in the foyer. The sound of dragging luggage and frantic heavy breathing flooded into the pristine house. I sat perfectly still at the head of the dining table. Desmond stood silently by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his arms crossed over his tailored suit. I listened as the chaotic footsteps stomped across the marble floors. Elias stormed into the dining room first, and the sheer sight of him was almost pathetic. The usually immaculate, untouchable patriarch looked like he had barely survived a shipwreck. His expensive cashmere overcoat was wrinkled and stained with spilled coffee. His face was red and bloated with exhaustion and fury. Right behind him came my mother, Vivian, shivering violently and clutching her designer purse like a flotation device. Her perfect hair was a frantic mess. Jamal stumbled in next, looking physically ill, his skin a pale, sickly gray. He was dragging two massive suitcases, struggling under the weight, because they clearly could not afford to tip a porter. Bringing up the rear was Chloe. The entitled old money heiress looked completely shattered. Her eyes were bloodshot and swollen from crying, and her pristine ski resort tan had faded into absolute misery. Elias did not even pause to take off his coat. His eyes locked onto me, sitting at the head of his precious dining table, and his face morphed into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He marched straight toward me, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. "Get up!" Elias screamed, his voice hoarse and cracking from days of travel and stress. "Get up out of that chair right now, Kendra. You have exactly 5 minutes to pack whatever fits into a single garbage bag and get out of my house. You ruined my son. You humiliated this family in front of the most important investors we have ever courted. You maliciously hacked into my company portal and froze my accounts. We had to sit in a miserable economy row in the back of a commercial flight surrounded by crying children because I had to beg Chloe's father for a loan just to get us back into the country. You are a vicious, ungrateful failure, and you are entirely dead to me. Move." I did not flinch. I did not blink. I sat perfectly still, resting my hands on the polished wood of the table. I let his desperate, frantic energy wash right over me, finding it completely powerless. I looked up at him, maintaining a cold, unwavering eye contact. I tilted my head slightly and gestured to the high-backed, ornate leather chair positioned directly to my right. "I believe you are standing in Grandpa's way," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, deadly whisper. The tall, wingback chair slowly swiveled around. Elias froze in his tracks, his pointing finger dropping slowly to his side. Vivian let out a sharp, audible gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Grandpa Silas was not wearing the thin, worn cardigan they had left him freezing in. He was dressed in a sharp, custom-tailored three-piece charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. His posture was impeccable, his back straight as a steel rod. He looked healthier, sharper, and more physically formidable than he had in an entire decade. There was no blank stare. There was no confusion. He was the undisputed king of the Sterling bloodline, and he was looking at his son with absolute lethal disgust. "You left me to rot!" "Elias," Silas said, his deep baritone vibrating through the massive room like thunder. "You turned off the heat in my own home and left me to freeze in the dark like a forgotten stray dog. And you stole from my legacy to play dress-up for these people." Silas lifted his hand and gestured dismissively toward Chloe, who shrank back against the wall, her eyes wide with shock. "You gutted the company I bled for, just to buy a seat at a table where you were never going to be respected." Grandpa Jamal stammered, his voice shaking so badly he could barely form the words. "Grandpa, your mind, you are supposed to be sick. We thought you were losing your memory. We were doing what was best for the company. We were securing our future." "You do not have a future, Jamal," I interrupted, drawing the attention back to the center of the table. I reached down and picked up the first of 4 thick manila folders Desmond had prepared for me. I slid the heavy folder across the smooth mahogany surface. It stopped exactly in front of where Jamal was standing. "Folder 1. I said, my tone clinical and relentless. "That is the formal fraud conviction pipeline. It contains the metadata, the IP addresses, and the forensic handwriting analysis proving you forged my signature on a $250,000 commercial loan." Desmond officially filed that packet with the Federal Financial Crimes Task Force and the Fraud Division of the bank 3 days ago. They are prosecuting you, Jamal. You committed a felony to fund your fake lifestyle, and you left a digital trail so wide a child could follow it. You are going to federal prison. Chloe let out a strangled sob, taking a massive step away from Jamal as if he were suddenly radioactive. "Jamal, what is she talking about?" Chloe cried, her voice bordering on hysterical. "You told my father the bank made a clerical error. You told us your sister was just a jealous, unstable freelancer who locked the accounts out of spite. You told my dad you had millions in liquid capital ready to transfer for the real estate deal." I did not give Jamal a single second to formulate another pathetic lie. I picked up the second folder and slid it directly toward Elias. Folder 2. I continued, keeping my eyes locked on my father. "That is your immediate termination from Sterling Freight and Logistics. It outlines your gross embezzlement, your breach of fiduciary duty, and the total revocation of all your operational proxies. You are fired, Elias. You do not run the company. You do not have a title. You are completely locked out of the building, the banking portal, and the legacy." And that termination was signed by the new sole chief executive officer and majority shareholder of the Sterling Family Trust. Me. Elias stared at the folder, his face draining of all color. He looked from the document to me and then to Silas. "Dad," Elias whispered, his voice cracking with absolute terror. "Dad, you cannot do this. You cannot give the company to a woman who appraises paintings. She does not know how to run a corporate logistics firm. I am your son. I built this brand with you." "You built nothing," Silas replied, his voice colder than the winter snow outside. "You inherited a fortress, and you sold the bricks to buy designer ski clothes. Kendra built her own business from the ground up while you starved her of resources. She is exactly what this family needs. You are just a thief in a nice suit." I reached for the third manila folder and slid it straight down the middle of the table. "And folder 3 concerns the roof currently over your head." My mother. Vivian finally stepped forward, her voice trembling uncontrollably. "What do you mean, the roof over our head, Kendra? This is our home. We bought this estate 15 years ago." "You did not buy anything, Vivian," I corrected her, refusing to use the title of mother for a woman who had treated me like a disease my entire life. "You used the company trust to finance this estate because Elias had ruined his personal credit trying to keep up with the country club dues. The deed to this house is held by the Sterling Family Trust, the same trust that I now own in its entirety. You have zero equity in this property. You do not own the walls, the floors, or the chandelier hanging above your head. You are nothing but temporary tenants, and your lease has just been permanently revoked. The reality of the situation hit the room with the force of a bomb. Chloe realized in that exact moment that Jamal was not a wealthy scion of a powerful Southern family. He was a broke, desperate fraud who was about to be indicted by the federal government. He had lied to her, he had lied to her powerful father, and he had dragged her into a spectacular financial ruin. Chloe dropped her designer bag onto the floor. She reached down and pulled her massive diamond wedding ring off her finger. She slammed the ring down onto the mahogany table, the diamond scratching the polished wood. "I am calling my father," Chloe said, her voice shaking with pure disgust as she looked at Jamal. "Do not ever speak to me again. You are pathetic." Chloe turned around, walked straight out the front door, and slammed it behind her, leaving Jamal completely shattered. Jamal collapsed to his knees right there on the dining room floor. He grabbed the edge of the table, sobbing uncontrollably. "Mom, you have to fix this," Jamal begged, looking up at Vivian with tears streaming down his face. "Mom, please do not let them send me to prison. I just wanted to be respected. I just wanted to be like Dad." Vivian looked down at her golden child, the son she had prioritized over my mental health and my basic survival for 33 years. She had no comfort to offer him. She turned to Elias, her face twisted in absolute horror. "Elias, do something," Vivian cried, hitting his shoulder. "Elias, tell them to stop. We cannot lose our social standing. We cannot lose the house. My friends will be here for brunch on Sunday." Elias looked completely broken. The arrogant, untouchable patriarch had been entirely stripped of his power. He looked at me. His shoulders slumped, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic panic. "Kendra, please," Elias whispered. "Where are we supposed to go? We have no money. The accounts are frozen. We have nowhere to live." I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back from the table. I picked up my tailored wool coat from the back of the chair and slipped it on, smoothing out the lapels. I looked down at the three people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. "There is a homeless shelter downtown," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of a single ounce of pity. "I hear they serve a great Sunday dinner. Leave the house keys on the counter before you exit." I turned my back on them. Grandpa Silas stood up, brushing a piece of invisible lint from his custom suit. Desmond snapped his briefcase shut. Silas and I walked out the back door toward my waiting car, leaving Elias, Vivian, and Jamal screaming at each other in the echoing ruins of their fake empire. The ultimate lesson here is that sharing DNA does not give anyone the right to disrespect your boundaries. We are often conditioned to believe that family loyalty means shrinking ourselves to keep the peace. However, true love never requires you to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic relatives warm. Your worth is not defined by people committed to misunderstanding you. Real empowerment comes when you finally find the courage to walk away from tables where respect is no longer served and confidently build your own. Have you ever cut ties to protect your peace? Share your story below and subscribe.